Hi, second grade. Today's Thursday, May 21st. It would have been our last day of school, but instead, we haven't seen each other for about 10 weeks. I'm going to read to you the last chapter, so it fits perfectly with our last day of school. And then I'm hoping to see all of you at the parade at 1 o'clock at William Cullen Bryant today. I will be there waving. And yes, it would have been a great school year. I just know it. But it's all good, and we will see each other again in August. I really think that we will be back at William Cullen Bryant in August, and you'll just be in the next room. You'll be in third grade. You can stop and say hi to me as you go into Miss Schindler or Miss Jeffries' classroom. I knew her name was Jeffries. Okay, second grade, here we go. We are on chapter 22, A Warm Wind. Here we go. And so Wilbur came home to his beloved manure pile in the barn cellar. His was a strange homecoming. Around his neck, he wore a medal of honor. In his mouth, he held a sack of spider's eggs. There was no place like home, Wilbur thought, as he placed Charlotte's 514 unborn children carefully in a safe corner. The barn smelled good. His friends, the sheep and the geese, were glad to see that he was back. The geese gave a noisy welcome. Congratulations! They cried. Nice work. Mr. Zuckerman took the medal from Wilbur's neck and hung it on a nail over the pig pen, where visitors could examine it. Wilbur himself could look at it whenever he wanted to. In the days that followed, he was very happy. He grew to a great size. He no longer worried about being killed, for he knew that Mr. Zuckerman would keep him for as long as he lived. Wilbur often thought of Charlotte. A few strands of her old web hung in the doorway. Every day Wilbur would stand and look at the torn, empty web, and a lump would come into his throat. No one had ever had such a friend that was affectionate, loyal, and so skillful. The autumn days grew shorter. Lurvy brought the squashes and the pumpkins in from the garden and piled them on the barn floor where they wouldn't get nipped on the frosty nights. The maple trees and the birch trees turned bright colors of reds and oranges, and the wind shook them until they dropped their leaves one by one to the ground. Under the wild apple trees in the pasture, the little red apples lay thick on the ground, and the sheep gnawed on them, and the geese gnawed on them, and the foxes came at night and sniffed them. And one evening, just before Christmas, snow started to fall out of the sky. It covered the house and the barn and the fields and the woods. Wilbur had never seen snow before. When morning came and he went out, he ran through the snowdrifts in the yard for the fun of it. Fern and Avery arrived, dragging a sled. They coasted down the lane and out into the frozen pond that was out in the pasture. Coasting on a sled is the best thing there is, said Avery. Yes, it's the most fun, retorted Fern. Another good time is when the Ferris wheel stops and Henry and I are at the cart at the very top, and Henry makes it swing back and forth, and we can see for miles and miles up there. Goodness, Fern, are you still thinking about the fair and being like Henry? Avery said in disgust. The fair was months ago. I think about the fair all the time, said Fern, picking snow out of her ear. After Christmas, the thermometer dropped 10 below zero. Cold settled all over their town. The pasture was bleak and frozen. The cows stayed in the barn all the time now, except on sunny mornings when they went out and stood in the barnyard instead of standing in their straw pile. The sheep stayed near the barn too for protection. When they were thirsty, they ate snow. The geese hung around the barnyard the way the boys hang around a McDonald's when they're hungry. Mr. Zuckerman fed corn and turnips to keep the geese happy. Many, 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 many thanks, they always said when they saw food coming. Templeton moved indoors when winter came. His ratty home underneath the pig trough was too chilly. He fixed himself a cozy nest in the barn behind a bucket full of grain. He lined his nest with bits of dirty newspapers and rags and whatever he could find. He'd carry it home and put it in his nest to keep him warm. He continued to visit Wilbur 3 times a day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And Wilbur kept the promise he made. Wilbur let the rat eat his food first. And then when Templeton could not swallow another mouthful because he was stuffed, Wilbur would eat. As a result of overeating, Templeton grew bigger and fatter than any rat you have ever seen. He was gigantic. He was as big as a woodchuck. The old sheep spoke to him about his size one day. "If you start eating less, you might live longer," said the old sheep. "Who wants to live long?" sneered the rat. "I'm naturally a very heavy eater, and I get satisfaction from feasting every day." He patted his stomach, grinned at the sheep, and crept upstairs to lie down in his nest. All winter long, Wilbur watched over Charlotte's egg sack as though he was guarding his own children. He had scoped out a special place in the manure pile for the sack, next to a fence that was made out of boards. On a very cold night, he laid so that his breath would keep the egg sack warm. For Wilbur, nothing in his life was as important as that small, round object. Nothing else mattered. Patiently, he waited the end of winter and the coming of the baby spiders. Life is always rich and steady time when you're waiting for something to hatch. The winter ended at last. "I heard the frogs today," said the sheep one evening. "Listen, you can hear them now." Wilbur stood still, cocked his ear, and from the pond he heard the chorus of hundreds of little frogs. "That means it's springtime," said the old sheep thoughtfully. "Another spring." The snows melted and ran away, and the streams and the ditches bubbled and chatted with the rushing water. A sparrow with streaky feathers arrived and sang. The light strengthened, the mornings came sooner. Almost every morning there was another new lamb born. The goose was sitting on 9 eggs. The sky seemed wider and warmer, and the wind had a warm breeze. The last remaining strands of Charlotte's old web had floated away and vanished. One fine sunny morning after breakfast, Wilbur stood watching the precious egg sack. He wasn't thinking of anything much, and as he stood there, he noticed something move. He stepped closer and stared. A tiny spider crawled from the sack. It was no bigger than a grain of rice. Its body was gray with a black stripe underneath. Its legs were gray and tan. It looked just like Charlotte. Wilbur trembled all over when he saw it. The little spider waved at him. Then Wilbur looked more closely, and 2 more spiders crawled out and waved. They climbed round and round the sack, exploring their new world. Then 3 more little spiders, then 8 more, then 10 more. Charlotte's children were here at last. Wilbur's heart pounded. He began to squeal. Then he raced in circles and kicked manure into the air. Then he turned a backflip. He planted his front feet and came and stopped right in front of Charlotte's children. "Hello there," he said. The first spider said hello, but its voice was so soft Wilbur couldn't hear it. "I'm an old friend of your mother's," said Wilbur. "I'm glad to see you. Are you all right? Is everything all right?" The little spider waved their legs at him. Wilbur could see by the way they acted, they were glad to see him. "Is there anything I can get you? Is there anything you need?" The young spiders just waved. For several days and several nights they crawled here and there, up and down, around about, waving at Wilbur, trailing their tiny drag lines behind them, exploring their home. There were dozens and dozens of them. Wilbur couldn't count them, but he knew he had a great many new friends. They grew quite rapidly. Soon each were as big as a pea. They made their tiny webs near the sack. Then came a quiet morning when Mr. Zuckerman opened the door on the side of the barn and a warm air blew softly into the cellar. The air smelled of damp earth, spruce trees, sweet springtime. The baby spiders felt the warm draft. One spider climbed to the top of the fence and then did something that was of a great surprise to Wilbur. The spider stood on its head. It pointed its spinnerets in the air and let loose some web. The silk formed a balloon. Wilbur watched the spider let go of the fence and float up into the air. "Goodbye," said the spider as he sailed out the doorway. Wait a minute," screamed Wilbur. "Where are you going?" But the spider was out of sight. Another baby spider crawled to the top of the fence, stood on its head, put out some silk, and sailed away. Then another and another, and soon the air was filled with tiny spiders floating away. Wilbur was frantic. Charlotte's babies were disappearing. "No, come back, children," he cried. "Goodbye," they called. "Goodbye, goodbye." At last, one little spider took time to stop and talk to Wilbur before leaving. "We're leaving here in the warm wind. This is the moment of us going out into the world. We are like astronauts, and we are going into the world to make webs for ourselves." "But where?" asked Wilbur. "Wherever the wind takes us. Here, there, near, far, east, west, north, south. We take a breeze, and we go as we please." "Are all of you going?" asked Wilbur. "You can't all go. I will be left alone. I won't have friends. Your mother would not want you all to leave me. I'm sure of it." The air was now so full of spiders that the barn cellar looked almost as though it had gathered. Spiders by the dozen were rising, circling, and floating away, sailing off in a chorus of goodbyes. Wilbur couldn't watch it anymore. In sorrow, he sank to the ground. He closed his eyes. This seemed like the end of the world, to be deserted by Charlotte's children. Wilbur cried himself to sleep. When he woke in the afternoon, he looked at the egg sack. It was empty. He looked into the air. The spiders were gone. Then he walked drearily to the doorway where Charlotte's web used to be. He was standing there thinking of her when he heard a small voice. "Salutations! I'm up here," it said. "So am I," said another voice. "So am I," said the third voice. "The 3 of us are staying. We like this barn and we like you." Wilbur looked up at the top of the doorway. 3 small webs were being constructed. Each spider was working busily and it was one of Charlotte's daughters. "Can I take this to mean," asked Wilbur, "that you have definitely decided to stay in this barn and that I'm going to have 3 new friends?" "You will indeed," said the spiders. "Could you tell me your names?" asked Wilbur, trembling with joy. "I will tell you my name," said the first little spider, "if you tell me why you are trembling." "I am trembling with joy," said Wilbur. "Oh, okay," said the first spider. "Then my name is Joy." "What was my mother's middle initial?" asked the spider. "A," said Wilbur. "Then my name is Ariana," said the spider. "How about me?" asked the third spider. "Will you just pick a nice, sensible name for me? Something not too long, not too fancy, and not too dumb." Wilbur thought hard. "How about Nellie?" he suggested. "Fine, I like it very much," said the third spider. "You may call me Nellie." And she daintily fastened her line to the next part of her web. Wilbur's heart brimmed with happiness. He felt that he should make a speech on this important occasion. "Joy, Ariana, Nellie, welcome to the barn cellar. You have chosen a wonderful doorway from which to string your web. I think it's only fair to tell you that I was devoted to your mother. I owe my very life to her. She was brilliant, beautiful, loyal to the end. I will treasure her memory. To you, her daughters, I pledge my friendship forever." "I pledge my friendship to you," said Joy. "I do too," said Ariana. "So do I," said Nellie, who just managed to catch a small gnat. It was a happy day for Wilbur, and many more happy days followed. As time went on, months and years came and went, he was never without friends. Fern did not come to the barn that often anymore. She was growing up, and she thought it was childish to come to the barn. Sitting on a stool but next to a pig pen, she felt was childish. But Charlotte's children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, year after year lived in the doorway. Each spring there were new little spiders hatching and taking place of the old spiders. Most of them sailed away on their thread, but always 2 or 3 stayed and set up their web in the doorway. Mr. Zuckerman took fine care of Wilbur all the rest of his days, and the pig was often visited by friends and admirers, for no one forgot the year of his triumph and the miracle of the spider web. Life in the barn was very good. Night and day, winter and summer, spring and fall, dull days and bright days. It was the best place to be, thought Wilbur, in this warm, delicious barn, with geese, the seasons, the sunshine, the birds, the rats, the sheep, the spiders, the smell of manure, and the glory of everything in a barn. Wilbur never forgot Charlotte. And although he loved her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren dearly, none of the new spiders were ever as special to him as Charlotte was. She was a special spider all by herself. It's not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Charlotte was both. The end. We are finished with Charlotte's Web, my ripped book. There were some pictures. I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope you will watch the movie. There are some movies of it. There's a cartoon, and then I know there's another movie that came out. I remember taking my boys to see it, so it maybe came out in like 2010. But the characters look real. They look like real animals. They're not animated. They're not cartoons. So let me show you some pictures. Here is Templeton getting so fat from eating so much food. Here's the spiders floating away on their new threads. Wilbur, he looks so sad. 3 new spiders. And that's the end. Enjoy the summer, my 2nd graders who are now 3rd graders. Congratulations, and I will see you next year in 3rd grade.